They say your last words can define your entire life. One final sentence before everything fades. Some whisper forgiveness. Others spit out defiance. And a few leave behind mysteries that have haunted generations. In history, the last words of famous figures have often been recorded, repeated, and remembered not just because of who said them, but because of how they were said and what they revealed about their state of mind in that final, irreversible moment. These moments are often stripped of all pretense. The mask is gone, the stakes are absolute, and what comes out of a person's mouth is as close to pure truth as we may ever hear. Today, we'll step into those tense rooms, battlefields, and execution grounds to hear the last breaths of those who knew the end was seconds away and weren't afraid to speak. 10. I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country. Nathan Hale, 1776. It was the American Revolution. The year 1776. Tensions between the Continental Army and the British were boiling over, and espionage was a dangerous game. Nathan Hale, a 21-year-old American officer, volunteered to go behind enemy lines to gather intelligence for General George Washington. He knew the risks capture meant certain death, but patriotism overpowered fear. Disguised as a schoolteacher, Hal infiltrated British-occupied New York for days. He collected notes on troop movements and supply routes, but fate turned against him. Caught with incriminating documents hidden in his boots, he was arrested by the British and quickly sentenced to hang without trial. On the morning of September 22, 1776, Hale was led to the gallows. Witnesses said his demeanor was calm, almost unnervingly so. The noose was placed around his neck. British soldiers expected begging, or at least some sign of fear. Instead, he delivered a line that would echo for centuries. I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country. The words came from a popular play of the era Joseph Addison's Cato, which Hale had admired. By quoting it, he aligned himself with the timeless ideal of sacrificing for liberty. His executioner pulled the rope, but his defiance lived on. Even now, school children in America recite his last words as the embodiment of courage. The chilling part is that he could have begged for mercy or cursed his captors. Instead, he spoke like a man who had already accepted death before stepping onto the platform. Hale's legacy wasn't just that he died for the cause at S, that he faced the inevitable with unwavering conviction, turning a moment of fear into a piece of patriotic theater. Number 9. Shoot straight, you bastards. Breaker Morant 1902. Fast forward to the early 1900s during the brutal Boer War in South Africa. Harry Breaker Morant was an Australian soldier, horseman, and poet known for his charisma, but also for his ruthless efficiency in combat. In 1901, he and several comrades were accused of executing Boer prisoners of war in retaliation for the death of a fellow officer. The trial was controversial. Some historians believing Morant was scapegoated to appease political tensions between Britain and its colonies. Found guilty by a British military court, Morant and fellow soldier Peter Hancock were sentenced to death by firing squad. The dawn of February 27, 1902, was grim. The two men were led to the execution site at Pretoria, standing before a row of soldiers with rifles. Morant refused a blindfold, his back straight, eyes locked on the men who would kill him. He uttered words that were part command, part insult, and part challenge. Shoot straight, you bastards. Don't make a mess of it. It was raw, unpolished, and utterly defiant, a final act of control in a situation where he had none. Moments later, the shots rang out, and Morant fell. His last words have been immortalized in books, plays, and even the 1980 film Breaker Morant. Some view them as the battle cry of a soldier unafraid to face death. Others see them as bitter contempt for the justice he believed had failed him. Regardless, the image is unforgettable. A man at the end of his life still barking orders to the firing squad. Both of these moments tell us more than just what was said. They reveal the essence of the speaker-esque character. Hale's measured patriotism and Morant's unflinching defiance couldn't be more different. Yet both turned their last breaths into declarations that outlived them. In those final seconds, stripped of everything but truth, they showed the world exactly who they were. Number 8. I am ready to meet my maker. Whether my Maker is prepared for the great ordeal of meeting me is another matter. Winston Churchill, 1965. Winston Churchill was more than Britain's wartime. As Prime Minister, he was a man whose voice and words shaped the course of the 20th century. He led a nation through the horrors of World War II, faced down Nazi Germany when defeat seemed inevitable, and became a symbol of resilience under fire. But beyond the politics and the victories, Churchill was known for his razor-sharp wit. He never shied away from an opportunity to turn even the most solemn occasions into moments of humor. And death, as it turned out, was no exception. By January 1965, Churchill's health had been deteriorating for years. He'd suffered multiple strokes, and the once tireless leader now spent most of his days confined to his home at Hyde Park Gate in London. Friends and family gathered as the end drew near. In those final days, someone asked him, perhaps with genuine concern, he was ready to face what came next. Churchill, frail but still armed with that unmistakable wit, gave a response that seemed to sum up his entire personality. I am ready to meet my Maker. Whether my Maker is prepared for the great ordeal of meeting me is another matter. It was the perfect mix of reverence and mischief, acknowledging the inevitability of death, while simultaneously suggesting that even God himself might not be ready for Winston Churchill's arrival. The line was delivered with such casual confidence that it's hard to tell if it was meant as a joke, statement of ego, or a final bit of defiance in the face of the unknown. 2 days later, Churchill slipped into a coma and passed away at the age of 90. His funeral was one of the largest state events in British history, attended by royalty, world leaders, and millions watching around the globe. Yet amid all the grandeur, what lingered in people's minds was that last verbal flourish, one final reminder that Churchill never entered a room or left the world quietly. Number 7. I am about to take my last voyage, a great leap in the dark. Thomas Hobbes, 1679. Thomas Hobbes was one of the most influential political philosophers in history, best known for his 1651 masterpiece Leviathan. His work argued for the necessity of strong, centralized authority to maintain order in a world where human nature could lead to chaos. But while Hobbes had spent his life dissecting the mechanics of power and society, he was also famously uneasy about death. He referred to it as the King of Terrors, a shadow that loomed over even the most rational mind. In the winter of 1679, Hobbes lay in bed at the age of 91, a remarkable lifespan for the era. Pneumonia had weakened him beyond recovery, and his body could no longer keep pace with his restless mind. Friends, servants, and family members gathered, perhaps expecting some final summation of his life's philosophy. A neat conclusion from the man who had spent decades trying to explain the human condition. But what came instead was something entirely different. I am about to take my last voyage, a great leap in the dark. It was a sentence loaded with both poetic imagery and profound honesty. Last voyage suggested a transition, a journey to a place no map could chart. But great leap in the dark revealed Hobbes' stark recognition that no philosophy, no matter how thorough, could illuminate what awaited him. For all his intellect and logic, here was a man admitting that the final step was shrouded in uncertainty. It was a confession as much as a farewell. And it resonated precisely because of who said it. A man who had built a career on explaining the world, yet left it acknowledging that some truths could never be known until it was too late. Shortly afterward, Hobbes passed away, leaving behind works that would influence political theory for centuries, but also leaving behind that haunting image of a leap into an unknowable void. 6. I have offended God and mankind because my work did not reach the quality it should have. Leonardo da Vinci, 1519. Leonardo da Vinci's name has become shorthand for genius. Painter, sculptor, architect, engineer, anatomist, inventor, his curiosity knew no bounds. He dissected cadavers to understand muscles and organs, sketched flying machines centuries before aviation existed, and designed weapons so advanced they frightened the rulers who commissioned them. Yet to Leonardo, each achievement was simply another step toward an impossible perfection. By the spring of 1519, Leonardo had been living in Amboise, France. For several years under the patronage of King Francis I, the king adored him, often visiting to discuss art, science, and philosophy. Leonardo, by then in his late 60s, moved more slowly and relied on assistance, but his mind was as active as ever. He spent his final years refining old ideas and mentoring students rather than starting new, ambitious projects. In early May, illness confined him to bed. We don't know exactly what struck him. Some historians suggest recurrent strokes. Others suspect a mix of heart problems and general decline. Those close to him later wrote that even in his weakened state, Leonardo was always scribbling in notebooks, adjusting designs, and criticizing his own old paintings. He was particularly fixated on the Last Supper, lamenting the damage it had already suffered due to his experimental technique. As his condition worsened, the small room enclosed. His residence near the king's chateau became a quiet hub of visitors. Students like Francesco Melzi, loyal assistants, and members of the French court. One of them, perhaps sensing the end, asked if Leonardo felt at peace with the life he had lived. His response was not the satisfied farewell many expected. Instead, he whispered, "I have offended God and mankind because my work did not reach the quality it should have." It was shocking not because the words were bitter, but because they came from the man whose creations had redefined the limits of human skill. But Leonardo's life had been one long pursuit of mastery, and mastery, in his mind, had no finish line. He had left countless projects unfinished, vast murals abandoned, notebooks filled with designs that never reached reality. Commissions delayed for years because he couldn't stop making adjustments. To others, these were signs of artistic passion. To him, they were failures to deliver the perfection he believed God had intended him to achieve. This final confession reveals a paradox. The man we view as a timeless genius saw himself as an imperfect servant of his gifts. He measured his work not against his peers, but against the impossible. And in his last breath, he chose honesty over comfort. That is perhaps why his words chill us. They remind us that even the greatest among us can die feeling unfinished. Number 5. I should never have switched from scotch to martinis. Humphrey Bogart, 1957. If Leonardo's last words were a heavy confession, Humphrey Bogart's were the opposite, a wry, almost comical jab at himself. Bogart was the quintessential Hollywood tough guy, a man whose gravelly voice and hard stare made him the star of classics like Casablanca, The Maltese Falcon, and The Big Sleep. But part of what made Bogart so beloved was that off-screen. He was just as sharp-witted and irreverent as the characters he played. Born in 1899 in New York City, Bogart had served in the Navy during World War I before drifting into acting. His rise to stardom in the 1940s was meteoric, and he quickly became not just an actor, but a cultural symbol. He was famously private, fiercely independent, and utterly devoted to his fourth wife, actress Lauren Bacall. But he was also known for his indulgences, chief among them Scotch whiskey, which he drank steadily throughout his adult life. By the mid-1950s, decades of smoking often up to 3 packs a day and heavy drinking began to erode his health. In 1956, he was diagnosed with advanced esophageal cancer. Surgery and treatment slowed, but could not stop the disease. Bogart lost weight rapidly, dropping from his usual 160 pounds to under 90. Friends recalled that while his body weakened, his wit remained razor-sharp. In January 1957, confined to his bedroom, Bogart was visited daily by close friends like Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. Lauren Bacall was almost always by his side. Despite the pain, Bogart often tried to keep the mood light. At one point, perhaps during a quiet conversation about his habits, he delivered his final one-liner. "I should never have switched from scotch to martinis." It was absurd, self-deprecating, and entirely in character. Whether he meant it as a genuine joke about his lifestyle or as a sly wink at the inevitability of death, the line stuck. Those who knew him said it perfectly captured Bogart's refusal to let sentimentality dictate his final moments. He wouldn't offer a grand philosophical statement or a weepy farewell. Instead, he'd go out the same way he'd lived: cool, understated, and a little bit rebellious. Hours later, Bogart passed away in his sleep at the age of 57. The funeral drew the elite of Hollywood. But for many who loved his films, the memory of that last quip became part of his legend. It was a reminder that style is not about clothing or posture, it's about holding on to your identity, even when everything else is slipping away. Both of these final statements could not be more different, yet they share something in common. They reveal the unfiltered core of the person speaking. Leonardo's perfectionism and humility persisted until his final breath. Bogart's humor and self-assurance didn't fade even as death closed in. That is what makes last words so powerful. They are not crafted for an audience, yet they often become the most enduring lines of a person's life. Number 4. I am just going outside, and maybe some time. Captain Lawrence Oates, 1912. Antarctica in 1912 was not just cold, it was an unrelenting void of white, where the wind cut through clothing like knives and every step meant battling nature itself. Captain Lawrence Oates was part of one of the most famous and tragic polar expeditions in history, Captain Robert Falcon Scott Il-Fata Terra Nova expedition. Their mission was simple in goal, but deadly in execution. Be the first to reach the South Pole. By January 1912, they had done it. But when Scott's team arrived, a small black flag told them the devastating truth. Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen had beaten them there. The men posed for photographs with their Union Jack, but the victory was hollow. They now faced a far more dangerous challenge, getting home. The return journey was a nightmare. Temperatures plunged to -40 degrees Celsius, -40 degrees Fahrenheit, and lower. Blizzards raged without warning, and supplies dwindled faster than expected. The men were already weakened from months in the field, their faces weathered and skin frostbitten. Lawrence Oates, a cavalry officer by training, had been a strong and capable member of the team. But frostbite soon attacked his feet and toes. With each day, the pain became more unbearable, and his pace slowed to a crawl. Scott's diary entries paint a grim picture. Oates was suffering from gangrene in his extremities, his skin blackened and swollen. Every mile the group traveled with him meant more energy expended, more precious calories burned. Oates knew what this meant. He was becoming a burden that could doom them all. On the morning of March 17, 1912, his 32nd birthday, he struggled to his feet inside their tent, pulled on his boots with effort, and made a statement in a voice described by Scott as calm and unselfconscious. "I am just going outside and maybe some time." No one tried to stop him. They knew what he was doing. In that instant, Oates accepted his fate in one of the most understated acts of heroism ever recorded. He stepped out into a raging blizzard and disappeared into the white void. His body was never found. Scott later wrote that they knew he walked deliberately to his death, sacrificing himself in the hope the others might reach safety. Tragically, Oates' sacrifice wasn't enough. The remaining 3 men, including Scott, died in their tent, just 11 miles from the supply depot. When their bodies were found months later, Scott's diary preserved Oates' last words, quiet, almost polite farewell that has since become a symbol of stoic courage in the face of certain death. It's chilling precisely because of its restraint. There was no speech about glory or patriotism, just the matter-of-fact acknowledgement of a man walking into oblivion. Number 3. Either that wallpaper goes, or I do. Oscar Wilde, 1900. If Oates' final words were stoic and selfless, Oscar Wilde's were pure, theater, witty, absurd, and yet somehow deeply poignant. Wilde had once been the toast of London, a celebrated playwright, novelist, and poet. Known for his sparkling wit and razor-sharp social commentary, his plays, like The Importance of Being Earnest, drew sold-out audiences and cemented his place in literary history. But Wilde's world came crashing down in 1895. In a time when homosexuality was a criminal offense in Britain, Wilde was tried and convicted for gross indecency after a scandalous affair became public. The trial was sensational and brutal, and his sentence to years of hard labor destroyed his health and reputation. When he was released in 1897, Wilde left England in disgrace, living the rest of his life in relative exile in France. By 1900, Wilde's health had sharply declined. Years of hardship, combined with chronic ear infections from an old injury, had developed into meningitis, a death sentence in that era. Moved into the Hotel d'Alsace in Paris, a modest establishment with faded charm and, as Wilde would soon note, questionable interior design. The once gilded figure of London society was now living in a small, dimly lit room with peeling paint and garish floral wallpaper. Friends who visited described Wilde's bed as large but unkempt, the room cluttered with papers, books, and bottles of absinthe. Yet even in his weakened state, Wilde's wit had not dulled. In fact, He seemed to take a perverse delight in using humor to mask the gravity of his condition. As his final days approached, Wilde grew increasingly fixated on the wallpaper. Its chaotic patterns seemed to mock him, perhaps a symbol of the chaos that had overtaken his once ordered life. Then, with the timing of a master dramatist, he delivered his last known words. "Either that wallpaper goes, or I do." Those present couldn't help but laugh, even knowing the end was near. It was Wilde's way of seizing control of the moment, turning death into a duel with bad taste. Hours later, Wilde went, losing the battle not just to the wallpaper but to meningitis. The line has endured for over a century, not merely because it's funny, but because it's quintessential Wilde, irreverent, self-aware, and perfectly timed. In his last breath, he distilled his life's philosophy. If life must end, it should do so with style, wit, and a sense of the absurd. These two farewells couldn't be more different. Oates stepped into certain death with quiet bravery, leaving no room for drama. Wilde met death with a quip, as if the Grim Reaper were just another dinner guest to be charmed, yet both reveal an unshakable truth. Last words are often a pure reflection of character, stripped of pretense. Whether spoken in a blizzard on the edge of the world, or in a shabby Parisian hotel room, they carry the weight of a lifetime in a single sentence. Number 2. More weight. Giles Corey 1692. The Salem witch trials of 1692 stand as one of the darkest chapters in early American history, a perfect storm of religious hysteria, mass paranoia, and fatal injustice. Over several harrowing months in Massachusetts, more than 200 people were accused of witchcraft. 19 were hanged, several died in prison, and one Giles Corey was pressed to death under heavy stones in a form of execution. So brutal it remains singular in U.S. history. Corey was a prosperous but stubborn farmer in his early 80s when the hysteria reached his doorstep. His wife, Martha, had been accused of witchcraft. Soon afterward, Corey himself was named in the accusations, likely because of personal feuds and the fevered atmosphere that rewarded suspicion. But when brought before the court, Corey did something extraordinary. He refused to enter a plea of either guilty or not guilty. This was not an act of ignorance. Corey understood the law. If he entered a plea and was convicted, his property would be confiscated by the colony, leaving his children penniless. If he refused to plead, the trial could not proceed, and his estate would legally pass to his heirs. The judges, enraged by his defiance, ordered peine forte et dur pressing. Corey was laid in a field, a heavy board placed over his chest, and massive stones stacked on top. The pressure was designed to break his will before it broke his body. Witnesses recalled that his tongue protruded and was pushed back into his mouth with a stick. He endured the torment for 2 full days. Each time the magistrates demanded, "What is your plea?" He remained silent until, nearing the end, he finally spoke. His voice was hoarse, but unwavering. More weight. Those 2 words were more than defiance. They were a calculated refusal to surrender, ensuring that the law could not rob his family. In choosing to die under crushing stones rather than utter a plea, Corey turned his own execution into a final act of rebellion against a system he saw as corrupt. Even now, the simplicity and audacity of More Weight sends a chill. It is a man's last breath used not to curse or cry out in pain, but to challenge his killers to finish the job. Number 1. I am about to die with a broken heart. Pancho Villa, 1923. Doroteo Arango, better known as Pancho Villa, was more than a revolutionary general. He was a living legend in Mexico. Born into poverty, Villa rose to command the feared Del Norte during the Mexican Revolution, becoming both a hero to the oppressed and a nightmare to his enemies. His daring cavalry raids and unpredictable tactics made him nearly unstoppable on the battlefield. In the United States, his name was just as infamous, especially after his 1916 raid on Columbus, New Mexico, which prompted a full-scale military expedition into Mexico, led by General John J. Pershing. By 1923, Villa had laid down his arms, living in semi-retirement on a sprawling hacienda in Chihuahua. Officially, he was out of politics, but unofficially, his influence and reputation still made the powerful uneasy. Enemies, both political rivals and former allies, feared that Villa might one day return to the fight. Fear sealed his fate. On July 20th, 1923, Villa drove into the town of Peril in his Dodge touring car, accompanied by several bodyguards. The trip was routine, so it seemed, but hidden gunmen had been waiting. As the car rolled past, they unleashed a hail of bullets from rifles and pistols. Villa was struck multiple times. His driver was killed instantly, but Villa incredibly remained conscious for a brief moment. According to witnesses, as blood poured from his wounds, Villa uttered, "I am about to die with a broken heart." The meaning of those words has been debated for a century. Some believe he was speaking of betrayal that those he once trusted had turned against him. Others think he was lamenting the unfulfilled promises of the revolution, the dream of a just and equal Mexico slipping away. Whatever the intent, the phrase strips away the image of the unshakable warrior, revealing a man whose last emotion was not rage, but sorrow. Villa died minutes later, slumped in the driver's seat. His body, riddled with bullets, was left in public view before being taken away, a grim full stop to the life of one of Mexico's most complex figures. His final words endure because they are unexpected. The man who lived by the gun did not die cursing his assassins or rallying his followers. He died confessing a wound no bullet could cause. From Nathan Hale's patriotism to Pancho Villa's lament, from Oscar Wilde's humor to Giles Corey's defiance, these last words reveal something rare, an unfiltered glimpse into the soul of the speaker. There are moments where image and reputation fall away, and the truth, be it bravery, wit, regret, or pain, emerges unvarnished. That's why they stay with us long after the speaker is gone. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and share it with friends who love history's most chilling moments. Don T, forget to subscribe to Top TR10 for more gripping top 10s every week. Your next favorite countdown is just one click away.